nice this first week of like actual full on sun, and it's actually warm now, almost 80 degrees. How many of us went outside and worked in the yard around the house this week because of that? Okay, quite a few of us. Not everyone. Some of us don't have yards. I know Ethan and Lizzie are off the hook. Lucky them. But for the rest of us, this is that time of year where everything starts springing to life again, and therefore so must we, with all the work it takes to have a yard. Okay, for those of you that said you worked out in the yard this week, how many of you woke up on those days that you decided to make your yard better, looked out at the yard and thought, you know what's missing? More crabgrass, right? Or I really wish the dandelions would multiply this year. Anyone? No. No one said that. I can't believe it. Thought somebody here would have set a goal to get a thriving patch of weed going in our yard. And as silly as that is, what might be even more silly is that we spend, I don't know how much money, millions, billions of dollars every year as a nation on weed and feed, but you'd never have to seem to feed the weeds, right? They eat just fine. Baby your grass, though, you sing to your roses. I don't know if people still do that. Give your hydrangeas a spa day, and still all the nice stuff in your yard seems to die the moment you give it even a little bit of a break, or you forget one day, or whatever it is. But a weed, you can pour concrete over it, and it'll find a way to pop up. Say good morning 3 days later. This week for Victoria and I was the start of our lawn keeping. And as I was working on the weeds yesterday, she was pulling some, I was spraying others. I realized that each one of us deals with weeds in our spiritual lives. So here we go again with another one of the Scott's life stories turned into a sermon. But I think you'll come to realize that there are a lot of spiritual weeds that we face. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we look to you today and to your word. Pray that we would have our hearts open and ready for your love. Know that you want to change us and to make us better than who we are as people, in imperfect bodies. Pray you use me and my words this morning to convey a message that would pull to each person here, person watching online, wherever this message goes, God, that you would bless it and multiply it. Thank you for this beautiful morning together. I thank you, person who gave us all. In order to understand the weeds we have in our spiritual lives, I think it's important to understand why we deal with it in the first place. And the Bible makes it pretty clear, the book of Genesis, first book of the Bible, chapter 3, why this is. Adam and Eve had the perfect garden, the perfect life. They did what God told them not to do, ruined it for the rest of us, right? Genesis 3:17 through 19. God says to Adam, because you have heeded the voice of your wife and eaten from the tree of which I commanded you, saying, you shall not eat of it, cursed is the ground for your sake. In your toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you. You shall eat the herb of the field. In the sweat of your face you shall eat bread till you return to the ground, for out of it you were. Dust you are, dust you shall return. Thorns and the thistles and the things that are unsightly aren't just biological accidents. They are part of the toil of this fallen world. Weeds are now the default occurrence. If you do nothing, you don't get a garden, you get a patch of weeds. Growing as Christians is an act of resistance against sweat and toil of this imperfect life, trying as hard as we can to make things better, knowing that it's all decaying. So that's where weeds come from. I don't want to spend too much time on that because we've got a lot of learning about weeds to do this morning. I thought it might be good to define what a weed is, both physically and spiritually, so that we understand what we're dealing with. This is more research I'd never thought I'd do on, but I did a good amount of research, and it still wasn't that much. But here you go, Wikipedia. What makes something a weed? A plant that is considered undesirable in a particular situation, growing where it conflicts with preferences, needs, or goals. Weeds have characteristics that make them hazardous at times, aesthetically unappealing, difficult to control, or otherwise just unwanted. And often, when scientists talk about weeds, there are three things that they use to determine whether something is a weed. And I'll start with the letter P. First is, what is the plant? Identifying what it is, what it looks like, what its characteristics are, giving it an honest look. The second is the place. Okay, we've identified what this thing is. Now, where is it? Right? Is it where it belongs or not? And thirdly, perception. What does this seem to be in comparison to everything else around it? These three things, more often than not, will give you all the info you need to determine if something is. And I think there's some good spiritual application here, scripture to back it up, to ask ourselves these questions about the weeds that we grow in our lives, whether it's an attitude or a habit or anything that you're going through or doing. Place, plant, place, perception. What is the root issue? What is the plant itself? We can ask ourselves. Is there something that is immediately problematic about it? Right? The Bible makes it clear that certain things are wrong. And if you ever lie, if you ever steal, if you ever kill, murder, I should say, the sin. That's usually what we call those types of weeds, sin. There are plants in this earth that are considered unwanted everywhere, whether it's your house or a field of crops. There are others that are more situational. For example, in agriculture, weeds in those crop fields often reduce their harvest. Other weeds literally hurt to touch. Think of like the goat heads and such, right? And some are just plain ugly. So we have to ask ourselves, what is this plant in my life? If our lives are flower beds or gardens or our yard, we are planting things in our lives. What is that plant? Be honest about it. And then we must examine the place in our lives that this plant is growing. Is it growing where it doesn't belong? As an illustration, a hobby that you might have is a great flower in the backyard during a season of rest. But it becomes a weed if it starts growing in the middle of your marriage or your time with the Lord. John 15, verse 4. Jesus told his disciples, "Remain in me as I also remain. No branch can bear fruit by itself, it must remain in me." And it speaks clearly to this idea that we are to stick with the Lord. That is where we belong, seeking after him, doing what he asks, and not going rogue and doing our own thing. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, verses 1 through 8, a very popular passage where it talks about how there's a season for everything, a time for every purpose under heaven. And I'll read through these. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to break down and a time to build up. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to gain and a time to lose. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to sow, and a time to keep silence and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time of war and a time of peace. So we have to ask ourselves, is this the right time and place for this? At a certain point, openness and vulnerability gives way to gossip. At a certain point, ambition leads to greed. It might depend on your season of life, whether speaking up or keeping silent is more beneficial or not. We have to examine the place where our habits and attitudes belong. Jason, go ahead and put up my one picture for perception. Pulled this off the internet just as a visual. Sure, pretty much everyone perceives the one on the right to be better. Raise your hand if that is not the case. Okay. Doug thinks the one on the left is just fine. Oh, it is much better, but okay, the one on the left is fine, but the one on the right is much better. Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. Imagine all the stuff on the left intertwined with the stuff on the right. Your perception changes. Just because there's good stuff there doesn't excuse the bad stuff. You let weeds grow among pretty. And when we examine our perception, does it fit with the rest of what I want to grow? Right? The one on the right has a certain aesthetic they're going for. And there are a lot of plants that would be great, but probably wouldn't fit in that scenario. Does it provide some benefit? Does it look right to myself, to others? That's why I asked that question. What's your perception of it? Everyone perceives the one on the right as far better. And that's a bit of a litmus test for us as Christians. This is the kind of person I am, the kind of things that I do attractive to others. Am I pleased with when I look out in my yard and I see that's what I've grown? Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24 says, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me." Sometimes we don't know. We're undecided if we like the way it is or not. Sometimes we're blind to the fact that it's not what it should be. Plant, place. We'll go ahead and leave this up for the rest of the visual. We must examine competition's characteristics. We look at weeds, okay, we've examined how we analyze them. But there are other attributes that we must be mindful of. Most weeds, in fact, exhibit incredibly high potential to adapt in response to their conditions. Just as weeds adapt to their conditions, our spiritual weeds, whether it's distractions or bitterness or your laziness, adapts your season of life. What was a weed in your 20s might look different in your 50s, but the goal is still the same. And the Bible talks about how Satan himself is sneaky, tricky, and he gives us these weeds in different shapes and sizes and forms. Ephesians 6:11 says to put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against what? The wiles of the devil. He's crafty. One thing doesn't work, he'll try another. These weeds don't just exist, they compete. They want the same water, the same light, and all the nutrients that the good plants do. Every hour spent watering resentment is an hour of nutrients that have gone towards achieving peace. Every moment that something that doesn't belong in our lives is allowed to stay, it impacts your growth, whether it's visible to you or not. Sometimes it's underground, deep in the corners of your mind. Our good plants, good characteristics, our desirable features will suffer and begin lacking if weeds start to hog the nutrients. And not just that, there are thorns and burrs and chemical irritants on many weeds, which might translate to habits or attitudes that don't just take space or don't just happen, they hurt us and the people brush up against. But here's the interesting part. We spend all this money every year trying to eradicate things, the dandelion. See that bright yellow head in a sea of green, and we think that there's something wrong. Not how it should be. But then I thought over to my in-laws. While I'm out there spraying to mitigate weeds, my family harvests them and uses them for tea. I can't fathom drinking that stuff, I'm going to be honest. But they sell it in the stores. I confirmed with my wife just to be sure. That's more her thing. They take the very thing I'm trying to kill and they turn it into something that has health benefits. My nuisance is their nourishment. My weed is their wellness. Earlier, I said that a weed is a plant that don't prefer, right? We talked about preference. But what if our preferences are too narrow or altogether wrong? Could I be getting something out of this weed, but I've been blind to the opportunity for it to be turned around for good? Scientists will tell you that dandelions have deep taproots. They reach down into the hard, compact soil where the grass can't go, and they pull up the calcium and the nitrogen, and they bring that good stuff to the surface. In our lives, we often have these seasons. They call them weed seasons, right? We have struggle, seasons of thorns, or things that are growing in our lives that we didn't plant, certainly don't want. Pray that God would spray them away, want the perfect lawn and a comfortable life. God, as the master gardener, he doesn't waste the weeds. He uproots them, yes, because that's what must be done. But he knows that the thing you're complaining about can be turned to good. And I know Rick mentioned this in his sermon last week. God works all things together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Does that. That is what the Bible says. So that difficult coworker, the season of waiting you're in, the personal weakness that you can't stand won't just go away. Is reaching deep into the soil of your character, pulling up nutrients like patience, humility, and desperate dependence on God that you would never get otherwise. Thought it was interesting as I thought about weeds, thorns, that the cursed ground of Genesis led to the cursed cross where Jesus wore what? A crown of thorns. wearing it as a sign of redemption. As we close this morning, I want us to ask ourselves, are we fighting weeds that God's trying to use as medicine? You're so focused on the place that this weed exists and your perception of it that it's not at all what you want. And now you've missed the purpose that that weed is supposed to play. Isaiah 55:13, instead of the thorn bush, God says, will grow the juniper. Instead of briars, the myrtle will grow. This will be for the Lord's renown, for an everlasting sign that will be forever. I added 2 more P's to the scientist 3. You'll bear with me for just another couple of minutes. The fourth one for me is prevention, kind of what I was doing yesterday, trying to get ahead of it. Best way to deal with weeds is to make sure they never get the chance to grow. Putting down pre-emergent doesn't kill the grass, it just makes the soil very unwelcoming for all the stuff I don't. And I think that we need to, as Christians, treat the soil of our lives the same way, so there's no room for this stuff to land. Psalm 119:11 says, I have hidden your word in my heart that I might not sin against you. You don't have to wait for this thing to come around to start dealing with it. Proverbs 4:23, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Must take action before anything starts to happen. And the fifth one, pulling. All had that moment where, as kids, going out to weed, we just pull the tops off all of them without rooting them up entirely, and then parents wonder why the weeds came right back in a few days. Maybe that's just me. I had that experience. Maybe you mow them down. I don't know. But I assure you, that's not the way to deal with them. Just giving it a haircut at that point. The tactics we use spiritually to deal with weeds that already exist in our lives are confession and repentance. This is probably the most painful part of the process. Because pulling requires getting your hands dirty. It takes effort. Your hands start to hurt by the end of it when you're trying to dig into the ground. Hebrews 12:15 says, see to it that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. Matthew 5:29 and 30, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. That is what it means to uproot, not just to promise yourself you're going to do better next time. To take immediate, dramatic action. Go below the surface of the behavior, find the motive. So I hope that we can use these 5 P's as a diagnostic tool this week. What is this plant in my life? Is it something that I know is all right, or is it dangerous from the start? Is this plant in the right place, or does it belong elsewhere? And what is my perception of this? What do others think about this in my life? Am I working to prevent weeds from coming up? Am I willing to put in the extra work to uproot something that's already there, even if it hurts, takes time, and slows me down as I struggle with this? Our goal is a life that is desirable to God, that is growing in the right place, producing high yield. Picked out a song in closing that I'd like us to listen to in place of our regular closing song that I think goes nicely with this. We'll have a close.